Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. From ScarCity, Melissa Jackson, and myself, Jake, welcome to All Emotion. Like All Emotion is founded on real people, real stories, real talk. This next episode, ScarCity and myself do a deep dive. This is a former combat veteran I served with in Afghanistan. He speaks about combat, life and death, firefights, trusting the man next to you, and how communication is vital. That one night in Afghanistan. Let's take a listen. Hello and welcome to All Emotions. It's your host Jake. Got Scar City here. Scar City, how we doing, sir?
Doing amazing, doing amazing. Hello, everyone.
Welcome. We have a very, very exclusive interview today. Been trying to get this gentleman on the show. It's been a while. He's very, very, very busy with different things he has going on, but we're very excited. Ladies and gentlemen, Aaron Fillman. How we doing, sir?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Doing well. Finally happy that we made this happen. And before we get into it, what we want to speak about specifically with you today, I want to know, the audience know just a little bit about you, who you are, where you're from, and if you mind just speaking on and touching about how you and I, same place, same time, but when we really, you and I first really got to know each other.
Okay. Aaron Fillman, like you said, grew up in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, kind of a lower middle class kind of upbringing, pretty normal. Played baseball, played football, wrestled as a kid. First met Jake probably 2006. Started training up for Afghanistan, joined the Army. Really started to get to know Jake more in 2002, 2007, 2008. Time frame we were in Afghanistan. Went on a lot of missions with him. Jake was a driver slash gunner. I was a dismount. So worked quite a bit with him, communicating over the radio, communicating where we needed rounds to be placed if we were under fire.
That's awesome. And we walk into it. So we mobed out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And, we trained up, got ready to go. Our initial mission was we trained with the Air Force unit to provide a PSE, personal security detail for Air Force, specifically trained. They had certain people that had certain jobs that came to construction, foremen, different types of things along that line to go over to Afghanistan, rebuild roads. And the actual job it was considered part came out of Congress. It was called Provincial Reconstruction Team, PRT, which was a mission that, went over to Afghanistan, build roads, schools, things of that nature. But, as we trained, we got over there, something I want to touch on. It was very, it's like almost like a movie. you hear about these things. Literally, as we had our mission, we got off the plane. It landed in Bagram Airfield. What happened? You remember there was a first sergeant from the 82nd Airborne Division based out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And he came over as we were literally walking off a plane. And do you remember what he said to that lieutenant colonel and the rest of us?
I do. It's just like you said. It was like straight out of like a war movie you'd see on like Black Hawk Down or something like that. I remember the tail lowering, this guy walking up to the plane, approaching our group. And I remember him and the colonel kind of having words. And the first sergeant said, "Your guys are no longer your guys anymore. We don't have kinetic forces in Afghanistan, which means they didn't have that many infantry guys in Afghanistan. They're no longer yours. They're going out to this place called Morales Fraser, and they're going to start moving on enemy objectives." And it was like you said, it was really surreal. It was straight out of a movie. And that was the first time I think it kind of hit. War is war, but that's like the first time where you're like, oh, this is going to get interesting.
Yeah, and do you mind just speaking about our squad? Because we were third squad, and we had about 10, 11, maybe 12 of us, because platoon sergeant then later on came out with us, obviously, most of the time when we got on missions. Do you mind, there wasn't that many guys that had prior experience, I think, maybe you correct me if I'm wrong, besides Jurgensen and myself in that squad. But do you mind speaking on that if you don't mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys were the actually only combat vets in the group at the time. Like you said, there was like 11, 12 of us, very tight-knit group. I think our squad was probably one of the tightest knit out of the whole platoon. Definitely eye-opening. We were very young in the combat aspect of we didn't have a lot of experience, so we leaned heavily on yourself, Jorgensen, to help us not make stupid decisions. It was definitely, in my eyes, it was definitely very surreal slash scary, if that makes any sense. Didn't feel real at first because we had such little experience there, but we had a handful of guys that I think really steered us in the right direction.
Right. Now, to kind of paint the picture for the audience, now we had call them B huts, correct? In
Hmm.
Bagram. So just so our audience can kind of keep track and we stay on the timeline, we had B huts and actually like, our rooms initially at Bagram where we landed, but then we, as you just said, you know, the first sergeant explained that we actually were going to go out and track and look after Taliban movements and go out things of that nature. So we actually went out to a fire base. If you want to talk about that initial push when we first got out there, what that was like, and there was no power, there's no electricity. We had to use generators at Morales Fraser, and that is in Morales Fraser is in Kapisa Province, Tagab Valley. Now this is the beginning, I would say, about March time frame, beginning in 2008. You want to speak just a little bit about Morales Fraser and how
Uh,
we came back and forth sometimes from the back and forth from there and in Bagram, and then we'll get into some of the things that we, you know, you experienced out there in Morales Fraser and Norzab and Tagab Valley and Kapisa Province.
yeah, absolutely. So I still remember the first day we went to Morales Fraser. I think I was in the first or second truck. We pulled up to this old Special Forces compound that was named after these two Green Berets that got killed. Nobody had been on there for who knows how long, so it's been abandoned. We don't know what's going to be on there. Is it going to be booby trapped? Or are there going to be Taliban in there? Are there going to be Afghan forces in there? Who knows? I remember we pull up to the big black gate with the sea wire around the top of it, and we open the door. And as we're opening the door, there's mortar fins sticking out of the ground, like right in front of the gate. And I just remember thinking, okay, we're here. And ended up being a dud. Somebody probably had done it as a joke, A&A, whatever. But it was just a completely abandoned, wrecked base. There was stuff everywhere, garbage everywhere, no power, no running water. We had to clear the whole compound. It was just it was a situation that made the situation more rough than what it already was being in Afghanistan. And then we would do our own little convoys back to Bagram to get our own stuff because nobody would come out to provide us anything. So we had to, I can't even remember how long of a drive it felt or long of a drive it was back to Bagram, but it felt like forever because the roads were super narrow. I mean, I'm sure you remember those roads, and you're going up the side of the mountain on these roads in this huge up armored Humvee, and you're literally feet from the edge of this cliff. And if you roll off the cliff, you're not coming back. And I just remember it taking forever because those roads were probably, I mean, the Taliban IEDs themselves are scary, but I think the roads over there scared me almost more than anything. It was a very eye-opening experience of how the rest of the world was and just what we had to deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and that's awesome. Thank you for breaking that down for the audience. And as we go into a couple situations, ScarCity, and ask you about specific situations, you know, one that's a great point. What was the terrain like? You know, you grew up in central Pennsylvania, so we grew up in that area, north central Pennsylvania. It was kind of similar, not to that extent, but we grew up, you know, in the hills. You know what I mean? That
Yeah.
area. So what would you say? And thank you for breaking that down. You kind of already went into it, but just more specifically, what's the biggest thing in your opinion between the terrain and the altitude was a big thing, right? Because when you guys
Yeah.
when we dismounted, it was a lot difficult. It was very difficult for us because we're used to a certain altitude, and when you land in Bagram, you're already 5,000 feet above sea level. So
Right.
we grew up at a lower altitude. As we get into certain things and engagements, the Taliban and others are already used to a certain altitude, and we got the Mount Fraser. It was almost 10 to 15,000 feet higher than what we are accustomed to back in the States.
So I always put it whenever somebody asks me, I always say, imagine Pennsylvania on steroids. So lots of pine trees, hot down in the valley, it'd be 100, 110, and you'd walk up and dismount on the side of these mountains and you'd get up and it'd be 60, 50 degrees. And like you said, it's not easiest for us to move. We got anywhere from 30 to 80 pounds of gear on, depending on the mission. And you're above altitude that you're not used to. So getting these engagements with these guys that have been living there for years, their whole life. And it's almost like, I don't want to say they seem superhuman, but it's almost like, how are these guys moving around that fast? And how are they getting around these mountains so quickly? It's scary. But yeah, I always like to say it's Pennsylvania on steroids. They get more snow, it's hotter, it's more humid, the mountains are bigger. That's the way I always describe it.
Appreciate that. I want to speak about I remember it was in April. It was actually our first firefight, and so I'll just give my perspective on. I think this is a great opportunity because we just had my driver McGill on for that interview. He did a great job of breaking down this first firefight that we got into. Now you and some others were dismounted, and I remember I was coordinated with Tice. He's another gunner, and then a second squad came in to give us technically QRF quick reaction force. They came in. I was coordinating with them as well and prepping them until they got there. And if you remember, I do remember, it's funny, McGill, not funny, but McGill brought it up. I was actually speaking to Kern that was with you, my team leader, that was dismounted. And there was about, out of our squad, we had about 60 to 80 of you guys that were dismounted. I would say at least probably, if not a click to a click and a half out. And we had to adjust our rounds so you guys could just move. You guys were pinned down because the Taliban would shoot at you. I think this is a great opportunity for you to give your opinion and kind of just walk us through that particular, that event and that firefight that lasted anywhere between 4 to 6 hours.
Yeah. So, we got our intel that there was some Taliban moving around in Tagab. I believe it was, I'm trying to remember a little sub-valley name, Afghania. It was Afghania. And, we dismounted. Like you said, I think a total of 8 of us. And we start walking through these valleys, doing our searches. And for some reason that day, the fills in our dismounted radios dropped the CAS fills.
Sorry, not to cut you. Can you break that down for the audience that doesn't understand about radio freaks and basically the one you're talking about specifically is for our medevac, correct?
Yeah. So our fills are our encryption that goes in our radios, so enemy and other people can't listen to our secured communications. That way we can talk to each other without interruption or being heard. CAS is for our medevac and our like A10, so Apache stuff that comes in that when we're in trouble, they can come in and start lighting up targets if we need them to. So
Right.
for some reason that day,
like our air support.
For some reason that day, our air support, all of our fills for our radios dropped those. So I mean, it was really important that we still had fills to you guys. But as I said, we're walking through these valleys, and I remember we're crossing this little creek that's probably about knee high, and I'm like, man. And I still remember it, and it's so funny. Like in Afghanistan, I always had deja vu before something happened, and I don't know what anybody believes or anything. I'm not even sure what I believe in a lot of things when it comes to that kind of stuff. But I've always had deja vu when something really bad was going to happen. And that was the first time it happened. It was in that day. I remember walking across the creek and thinking, this seems so familiar. I've been here before. This is going to suck because my boots are going to be wet. My pants are going to be wet. It's going to be a long day. And we get across the creek into a field and we start hearing, that very familiar sound of crack, crack, crack. And then like almost like angry bumblebees flying by you, zing, zing, zing. And it's like, okay, we're in it now. We get into this little defilade position where they can't really shoot us, but at the same time, they know where we're at. We're essentially pinned down, like you said. Kern and Wirt start calling back to you guys because you guys had the marks in the 50s, and we were able to actually walk the rounds from your guys' guns onto the house. That way we could actually start to maneuver on them and get out of that bad position, which was amazing because you weren't shooting blind. You're using us as spotters, obviously, but it was just kind of cool that, we could coordinate that to where, hey, we're in deep trouble. We call back to our trucks and start getting rounds to where we can actually move and start to communicate and move on the enemy.
That's really important. Thank you for bringing that up because that is really important because you said you lost other freaks, your other channels to communicate with, like you said, medevac and air support. So thank God that you didn't lose communication with us, or it potentially could have been a lot worse.
Oh, I think we would have been in some real trouble because I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but I remember hearing an assessment after, and I'm pretty sure I remember the number that sticks in my head. There was over 100 fighters in the valley that day. And like you said, there was only, we had our 3 trucks with our 3 guns on them, and then like 6 to 8 of us dismounted. That could have turned out really bad.
Right. I don't know if you want to touch on it. There was actually someone that he was attached to us. He actually, during that ordeal, I know you were there, he actually ran. He ran and I got an Afghan fighter and he actually got shot.
Yeah. He got shot through the front of the hip and then exited his one butt cheek.
Well, I was not there. You were there. he was actually rescuing an Afghan fighter, correct?
Yeah. So what had happened is, well, after you guys were providing that fire, that's why we were moving up there to get to them, because they were separated from us. The Taliban got in between us, and we were trying to move on that. And when you guys started putting the rounds on the house, we could get up to them. So what had happened was that an Afghan police officer had walked out into a field beyond the compound, and there was Taliban fighters on the mountain, and they opened up on him. And I guess they hit him probably, can't remember exact number, but I know it was more than twice. We had to carry him out, but said person, without any regard for his own life, just ran out and grabbed the dude under heavy fire and brought him back. It was pretty impressive.
Yeah, it was awesome. And that, that wasn't his first time being shot. Not shot at. I'm being shot actually,
Yeah.
by shrapnel or gun or small arms fire, right? So,
Right.
no, I
Yeah,
appreciate
he wasn't
you.
a stranger.
Exactly. You see his experience. Philman, I appreciate it. Do you mind that walks into like our next really big one? We were actually myself, I saw someone with a flashlight and we were on the other side in the main road into Gob Valley. It was night, it was dark, and I looked across, there was a guy with a flashlight, and then some rounds started exchanging, and then didn't know, but people got on the radio, myself, I thought it was a Taliban. I engaged targets, and it was actually they started firing back at me. People got on the radio. If you want to go from here, and you could talk about what happened and that event that night, and then we
Yeah.
all got back down to the wadi.
Yeah, so I remember that night pretty clearly. We went into Tagab. We dropped a few dismounts off. Nothing happened. We were exfilling out, got back in the truck. And it's hilarious because I always quoted this one movie line from, I think it's Behind Enemy Lines with Owen Wilson. Where he's flying over the graves and he says, another thanks goes out to American
Yep,
taxpayers, mere
ab-
cost
ab-
of billions of dollars a year.
absolutely.
And I remember it was probably seconds after that last word came out of my mouth. And Kessler's window just got blown up, like got hit with that RPG. And then I remember hearing, I think you guys were either the truck behind us or the last truck in the convoy. I can't remember which. But I remember hearing the 50 open, and I'm like, man, Harrison's lighting somebody up right now. And then I start seeing red tracers come back, and I'm like, whoa, those are red tracers. That's not good. Those are ours. And I remember because I can't remember who was yelling over the radio. They're like, don't go in the wadi. They're going to get in between us. And the people that were told not to go into the wadi went into the wadi. And the Taliban got in between us, which caused more crossfire. But after that, I remember we went into the wadi, and that's the night, was it 1, 2? I can't remember if it's 2 or 3 of us got wounded dealing with that situation. But yeah, that was a pretty wild night.
Yeah, and for those that don't know, a wadi is a dried up riverbed slash creek, but usually you know what I mean, just so they can kind of. And we were in those. We were even in the job. That other valley to if you're looking at like your 12 o'clock straight ahead, that's the valley to the left of us. So those two valleys, we were pretty much. Beside driving down to Kushbat, we were pretty much in those two valleys, in the
Right.
wadis. It's Jake from All Emotion. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Aaron, the guy that ScarCity and myself are interviewing right now, he's an entrepreneur. And he and his boys have started their own jiu-jitsu gym. Aaron is a brown belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So if you want to learn, check him out at the 2 locations in York and Hereford, Pennsylvania at yorkbjj.com and herefordbjj.com. So this is it, man. What happened on the evening of July 12th, 2008?
So that was the night that I got wounded. A handful of us got wounded that night. I was sitting outside of our little like weapons cleaning area where we sat outside the bee hut. And I'm sitting there listening to my iPod, and I just hear this horrendous explosion. And I'm like, oh, I know somebody's down in the valley right now. That's not good. So I hop up on the HESCO barrier, which is like essentially cardboard with chicken wire on the outside that they dump a bunch of dirt in that stops rounds and explosions. So I hop up on the top of it, and I see this smoke plume, and I start seeing tracers going back and forth from the valley to the MSR, which is military supply routes or road, and MSR back into the valley. And I'm like, okay, they're definitely engaged. And I just remember, squad leader coming out saying, hey, get on the trucks. We got to go down and respond, because we were QRF. And they're all our gear on. We're driving down. And I remember we took that hard right out of Morales Fraser onto the MSR. And again, I got deja vu, which was weird. There's a little kid kicking a soccer ball, walking down the road with his mom. And again, I was like, man, I've seen this before. I've been here before. And as we're going into the valley after, you see tracers going back and forth, RPGs getting lit off. We get down there, and our truck instantly just starts getting hammered with small arms fire. So AK rounds is hitting the doors. You can hear that like dead metal sound. And Tice is up in the gun firing. And I was like, that's a lot of fire coming our way. I should probably get out and at least throw a couple, burst in the direction of the Taliban. So I grabbed the 200 round drum, because I always kept the 200 round drums in the truck, not on me, because they're heavy. So I always had the 100 rounds on me.
And a saw, just
So
so
I grabbed
you
it.
can understand, the saw is an automatic. It's a dismounted machine gun that provides suppressive fire for when a dismounted patrol is moving. And it can also be used as a gun on top of many vehicles in the Army or the military, correct?
Yep. So I put the 200 round drum on. I'm like, I'm just going to dump this 200 rounds. I'm going to start gaining our fire superiority back. So I get out, and I'm probably 20, 30 rounds in, and I feel like something punched me in the leg, like just like a dead leg. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. It didn't hurt. It was just like, it felt like somebody punched me in the leg. And I was like, oh, okay. So start firing again, and then it just felt warm down my whole right leg. And I was like, what's going on there? And I looked down, and my whole right leg's covered in blood. I don't think that's good. So I walk back to the truck, and I tap Wirtz on the shoulder. I'm like, hey, man. He's like, what? And I was like, I think I'm hit. And he's like, what? I was like, I'm shot, man. And Wirtz as much as I do. And Wirtz was a very serious guy. So for him to be kind of like consoling had me worried. He's like, hey, buddy, just sit down. Give me your battle roster number, which is the thing that identifies you when you're wounded or killed. So I give him the battle roster number. Our driver came around, Kessler, and applied a tourniquet on my right leg. And I remember I was sitting there, and I slammed one of those big liter bottle of waters. And I was like, man, I'm still thirsty. So I opened another liter bottle of water, and I start slamming that. And I was like, oh man, I'm going into shock. Like thirsty, cold sweats, really focused on certain things, which I'll give the Army that. The Army is very good at teaching you and muscle memory teaching of, hey, this is shock, this is whatever. You can always perform whatever you're going to do because muscle memory. And Kessler, I was like, Kessler, I'm going into shock, man. So he's like, all right, man, stop looking at your leg. So I look down at the ground to my left, and I see my left calf pocket is full of blood. And I'm like, hey, man. And Kessler kind of looks up, and I'm like, I think I got 2 holes in me. He's like, what? And rips open the pant leg, and sure enough, there's another hole in my left calf. And some of the funniest things I ever heard in my life, it's funny but not funny, is like, stop getting shot, idiot. And Wirtz came over.
We had a really weird sense of humor in our squad, right?
Yeah, it was definitely weird. And I remember, he had both tourniquets on the legs at this point, and I pulled my legs into the truck, and I was like, all right, take me back to the base. And at this point, I'm scared, and everybody's scared at war. I don't care what anybody says. You're either nuts or you're scared, one of the two. So I'm like, all right, take me back to the base. And they're like, no, we got to get you in the MRAP to drive you back. And I was like, no, I think you guys can just take me back. I don't really feel like getting out right now. And Wirtz came over, and he's like, hey, man, I'm taking you to the MRAP. And he kind of limps me over there. We get in finally. And I remember Doc from your previous interview, hit me with a bunch of morphine. And he's like, hey, man, just try to stay awake. They're probably going to put you on a bird. You're going to go back to Bagram. Just try to stay awake because you got 2 tourniquets on you. You need to stay awake. So that was like my whole concentration was just staying awake. And I remember Jorgensen got on the radio and was like, hey, tell Fillman he only gets 1 Purple Heart for this incident. It's 1 incident, not 2. And
So
it gives me a
just to clarify,
chuckle.
yeah, just to clarify, Phil, I appreciate you, man. I know that it's a very serious situation. Where you got, excuse me, you got shot twice in the leg, correct?
Yeah, once in the right thigh, once in the left calf.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Yeah. And then I remember driving back to the fire base and the bird was waiting. So they put me on the bird, flew me to Bagram, which was it's a whole different experience. I mean, they're cutting everything off you. You know, it's not like when you go to the hospital, they're like, hey, take this off, take this off. They literally just cut your boots off you, cut your pants off you, cut your shirt off you, and they roll you into the ER with not stitch of clothes on. So it's kind of, I won't say embarrassing because you're worried about other things, but it's definitely a different experience to be rolled out in front of other people like that. And I mean, it is what it is, but it's a weird experience to have. That is for sure.
Yeah, Jay, I just want to jump in real quick and ask Aaron something around that. I'm curious as to the psychological aspect of you coming from being a civilian to being deployed. Like, what was that like mentally? Like, and then even prior to you being hit, what was that experience like? Like coming from a regular civilian life, and now, you're faced with all these decisions you have to make. Like, what is that like?
For me, it was very, I like to say surreal because a lot of it didn't feel real to me until people started getting hurt, if that makes any sense. The first time I felt like I was at war was when we had one of the guys that was with us actually get killed. Before that, it was like, oh, this is war. We're getting shot at. We're shooting back at them. But it seemed more like almost like a game until
Right.
people started getting hurt. And then you're like, no, this is for real. People are trying to hurt us. We're trying to hurt them.
Mm.
Mentally, that really, for me, didn't really mess with me all that bad because of the job that I picked. I mean, we're all infantry guys, so I kind of felt we already had that mentality of we're not going there to be nice people. We're going there to do something because somebody did something bad to us. Other than that, I mean, it didn't affect me too bad. I mean, obviously, yeah, friends get hurt, get killed. It's going to mess with you a bit, but I didn't have too big of an issue transitioning into it just for a simple fact. Like, I think if we would have been a different type of MOS, like if we were engineers or something and we went into a situation where we we're getting shot at all the time, you wouldn't necessarily be mentally prepared for that. But being infantry guys, you're going in, you're going to fight the bad guy. So I think we were already mentally prepared for that. At least I was.
All right, I appreciate that because I'm always curious as to the psychological state of a person, and then even furthermore, I'm impressed with soldiers when they're deployed into combat, and then they come back into the regular civilian world, and they behave in a civilized manner. I know it's easier said than done, but it's something I definitely take my hat off to. So I definitely, like I said, thank you for your service, you guys. I'm always impressed when I hear these stories. I don't have a military background, but I kind of feel like I do because of, where I grew up in New York City in the 80s and 90s, early 90s. It was very tragic, but not to be, not to downplay what you guys go through. So these experiences, I'm always learning from this. So I appreciate that, Aaron.
Thank you.
Hey, we really appreciate it, man. You sharing your experience and this is very powerful. And I know our audience will be educated and definitely take a lot away from this. I just have a few more. So after all that happened, I remember towards the end, if you remember, there was 2 Marine officers and 1 Navy corpsman that worked with us to train the ANA, Afghan National Army. Do you remember those guys?
Yeah, I do. Captain Melton, Lieutenant Madrazo, Corpsman Strickland. Unfortunately, they experienced a bad attack on our successes. The Taliban was starting to learn that, hey, can't go toe to toe with the Americans anymore. Every time we go toe to toe with them, they're calling air support in or they're maneuvering on us very well and getting the upper hand. So they are starting to lean more towards the Al Qaeda slash Iraq attempt of putting IEDs in the road. It was very near the end of our tour, but they had run over a double stack anti-tank mine. So double stack meaning the Taliban had put two on top of each other, and one of these is supposed to destroy a tank, which most people, I'm pretty sure, understand that tanks are much larger than Humvees. So this was two anti-tank mines that they rolled over, and it was very devastating. I still remember seeing leftover, I guess you could call it, of the Humvee that they brought to Ross Fraser after there wasn't much left. And it was very eye-opening, especially from the Iraq vets that were there, because a lot of the Iraq vets had made comments that that's a big IED and they hadn't seen destruction like that to a Humvee. So, I mean, it's definitely very eye-opening, that incident. And it was very eye-opening in the fact that, you know, the Taliban started switching their tactics so quickly, learning off of us. I also remember, I don't know, do you remember the replacements that replaced us? The guys that,
I do.
so they hit an IED not too long after that either, when they came in on the Afghanian road, pretty close to where Captain Melton and them hit that one too. So it's definitely a very big shift in the Taliban's tactical, how they
Yeah.
were operating.
You know, and I shared this before. I just want to get your thoughts about when their major, Captain Milton and their major asked us to put their caskets on the C-17. And I just know for me, I just remember like this is my third deployment, and I'm looking down at these caskets, and I don't know about you, but I was thinking to myself, I was like, this potentially should be us, because we went down
Yeah.
that road hundreds of more times than they did, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I mean, I guess speaks volumes on our platoon, our company, that, you know, this Marine major that was not involved with us at all. Obviously, Captain Milton, Lieutenant Madrazo, and Corporal Strictly probably spoke very highly of us, enjoyed working with us. That definitely ran through my mind a lot when we were doing that too. Is like, how many times have I been down that road? And even in my head, you know, I sat behind the squad leader. I was the back right seat. How many times did I see the jamming device that jammed the signals for the IEDs to go off start lighting up that yellow color when we went down that road, not thinking anything of it? So I mean, yeah, it's a different thought process for sure.
Absolutely. And lastly, how did that change, being in combat, being not shot at, big distinction, being shot, actually, actually have a, bullet actually hit, have a wound and actually get hit, shrapnel. How did those experiences shape you and your thought process after getting back home to the States?
So I mean, I'd like to say it didn't change me, but I think anybody that's been through combat is going to change no matter what you do. You know, you look at these guys that come back like Audie Murphy and all this stuff that have, PTSD, shell shock, whatever you want to call it. I think it can change you for the bad if you let it. I try not to let it change me for the bad. I try to turn that stuff into positives. For instance, you know, I don't think, I know a lot of people that never grew up and never had violence happen to them or anything. You know, this can't happen to me. I turn it into, I expect stuff to happen, and I don't let it slow down or change my life. I'm still going to go after what I want, even if something bad happens. So, I mean, that's one positive I've gotten from it. Then, in the fact that I don't think nothing can happen to me, and I now think stuff can happen. Therefore, I need to take steps to better myself, get a better situation under myself somehow. Just being proactive. So, I try to lean it to being proactive and not let it change me in a bad way.
Yep. And Aaron, we really appreciate your time, man. One last question I have for you is, if knowing what you know now, and you've gone through everything you've gone through in combat from day one when you were deployed until now, if you had to do it again, would you do it again, knowing what you know
100%.
now? Okay,
100%.
respect that. Appreciate that.
Aaron, so lastly, Aaron, what advice or feedback would you give someone that wanted to join the military or wanted to enlist or become an officer that wanted to specifically be in combat arms?
Make sure you really want it, because I think a lot of people enjoy the idea of being a combat vet. Listening to you and Jorgensen before I left, I was in the mindset of combat already. I think most people should be, but you know, the older guys that were in the unit were always like, "Hey man, don't wish for something unless you really know." And then you experience and you're like, "Man, maybe I should have listened." Just make sure you actually really want it, because you're gonna get what you wish for. If you're in infantry, combat arms, especially in today's day and age, the way it's looking, you're probably gonna get some combat experience here shortly. So I mean, just ensure that, one, not that you're strong enough, but that you're strong enough to reach out to friends if you're having issues after you go or before you go. Communication, like, people think that we're the most lethal military in the world because of our weapons. And one fact we are, but the other fact is that our communication is ridiculous. So just always make sure that you're communicating with your friends and your family. Let them know, like, hey, this is what I'm going through. Because keeping that stuff bottled up, you're gonna lose. Time is your enemy, and time never loses to anybody. So you just have to have that open line of communication with your family, friends, your buddies. So I'd always encourage anybody that's thinking about being combat arms to really have a good communication base before doing what you're going to do.
And we appreciate your time. This has been a very powerful time with you, Aaron. I know it's going to positively impact a lot of people out there. So I appreciate you you sharing with us, with ScarCity and myself and all the All Emotion audience. And the last way we close, ScarCity, do you have anything else you want to add or close it out?
No, I just want to say I appreciate you coming on, Aaron, and look forward to this being published, and it's going to be a great episode.
Appreciate you guys' time.
All right, thank you again, Aaron. Thank you again, Aaron, for stopping by All Emotion and sharing that powerful story. Make sure you tune in when we interview Aaron about entrepreneurship and his 2 new gyms. Make sure you follow Aaron on Facebook and Instagram, Aaron Fillman. And make sure you check out and follow his new gyms, East York Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Hereford Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in Pennsylvania. Making it happen. No excuses. This is Jake for myself, ScarCity, Melissa Jackson. Make sure you tune in and check out all the episodes at allemotionpodcast.com. Take care and be safe.